Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to our second to last Pastor's Drop-In Bible Study video on our Beatitudes lesson. And today we're going to look at the first half of the last Beatitude. Now, the last one is a little bit weird in that Jesus almost pulls it into two separate ones, but the themes sort of stretch between them. So in that sense, we're going to look at them as two separate halves so we can get a little bit more in depth with the time period allotted in our videos. But before we begin, I'd like to point out one other unique element of this beatitude. In this one, there's a direct reference back to themes we've seen in the first beatitude with reference to the kingdom of heaven, but also to the fourth beatitude, where we heard about righteousness. And what this tells us is that Jesus did not intend for the Beatitudes to be just a bullet list of entirely separate blessings, but to be understood as a coherent whole, as one system of blessing. Now, we don't have time in these little videos to go into that holistic, systematic element of the Beatitudes. But I did want to raise that to your attention as you go through these last few videos and as we wrap up our study of the Beatitudes. So as always today, we've got our first few moments where we'll be looking through the Beatitude as we read it in our modern English translations. And then I've got my handy-dandy note sheet with the English translation on top, and then all the Greek definitions and things, and then my rephrasing at the bottom. And we'll start with the English translation. You'll have a moment to think about it, and then we'll come over to the whiteboard to look through my retranslation. So today's beatitude is, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So what does that mean? Not necessarily what does that mean to you. That's for your meditations after the video. But what is the message Jesus is trying to convey with these words? Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So I invite you to pause the video now and think this through by yourself. And when you come back, we'll move on to the whiteboard. Alrighty, so moving over to our handy-dandy whiteboard and my retranslation. As always, we'll go through it briefly once, and then we'll pull apart all the different words and phrases one at a time. So here we have those who are harassed and persecuted because of their upright behavior, who are pressed and pressured to abandon it, their upright behavior, but who remain steadfast, are favored by God, because they hold on to and remain faithful to God's direction, which governs the universe. Now, in this particular retranslation of mine, you'll see a lot of words and phrases that have come up before in some of our other sessions. For example, we have upright behavior being our translation of righteousness, this idea that it's our holiness, our actions, how we live our life virtuously and in line with God's direction that matters. And speaking of God's direction, our translation of kingdom of heaven is God's direction which governs the universe. Remembering that kingdom in this sense does not mean a nation state, but it means God's right to rule, to give direction and guidance to us, and our responsibility to heed and to listen to that. And then, of course, we have favored by God being our recurring translation of blessed. But what about the other elements of today's beatitude, the idea of persecution? Well, there we have a rather long two-part rephrasing. It's those who are harassed and persecuted, who are pressured and pressed to abandon their upright behavior. Now, the word Jesus used for persecuted is a very multifaceted and all-encompassing term. It includes the idea of verbal harassment, of mockery, of ridicule, someone poking fun at you because of your righteousness, hence the word harassed. But it also speaks of a more tangible, material, physical persecution, both in terms of being denied things, being denied fellowship, being denied material resources, but also of aggressive, attacking sorts of persecution, torture, martyrdom, death. Hence, we retained persecuted here. But there's also this element where you're not being persecuted for no purpose. This isn't wanton violence. It's directed at getting us to abandon our upright behavior, to abandon our holiness, to abandon our faith. Hence the idea of being pressed and pressured to abandon our upright behavior. So what Jesus is saying here is that any sense in which the world, whether it's other people, whether it's systems, whether it's family, whether it's government, whether it's whatever it might be, whenever anything in the world is pressing and pressuring us to abandon our faith, to abandon our holiness, that is the kind of persecution Jesus is talking about. It can be very minor, from someone just poking fun at and mocking our religion, all the way up to being martyred, like a number of our brothers and sisters and siblings in Christ are facing in other parts of the world. Jesus is being all-inclusive here. Now, obviously, there's differentiation. Being poked fun at is not the same as being killed, but all of them fall under this umbrella of being persecuted. So how does this fit in with the wider sense? Those who are harassed and persecuted because of their upright behavior, because of their holiness, who are pressed and pressured to abandon it, but who remain steadfast, who hold on to their holiness, who hold on to their faith, are favored by God because they hold on to and remain faithful to God's direction which governs the universe. Our holiness, our uprightness, is one half of our relationship with God. The other half is God's direction and interaction with us, predominantly through the preaching of his word and the administration of his sacraments. So what Jesus is saying here is, when you are pressed and pressured and persecuted to give up your faith in God, but you remain steadfast, when you remain in relationship with the God who is love, that is your blessing. You remain tied to the pureness, the goodness, the holiness, the justice, the mercy, the forgiveness, the love that is God. And out of that, you're able to live a life of love, even when you're being pressured, both in the vertical sense towards God, but also horizontally towards our neighbors, whether it's our supportive neighbors, our family, our friends, our church community, or our enemies. As we remain tied to God and God's rule and God's love, through our upright behavior, through our holiness, we're able to remain in that love. Now, having said that, we come to my video recommendation, and I told you it would be back. And today, I want to recommend to you The Mission. It's a slightly older film. It's from 1986, and it's about a Jesuit Catholic missionary team and the work they did in South America. And in it, particularly in the character of Father Gabriel, we see what it means to remain truly loving and faithful to God in the face of immense persecution. Now, this is not a fun, Friday movie night with the family sort of movie. It's a drama. It's a historical drama. Probably not good for elementary schoolers, but everybody else who's old enough and can appreciate the fact that the world is not perfect. I very strongly encourage those folks to find a copy of this and watch it. It's a very deep very thoughtful expression of what it means to truly and completely be a Christian. It also looks at how people are sort of partially or imperfectly Christians, and there's goodness in that as well. But it shows the fullness of what it means to be a Christian, to remain in love vertically with God, horizontally with our neighbors, both friends and enemies, and that in light of and in the context of intense persecution. And in that sense, to be like Christ when he gave himself up for us in his passion and his death and his crucifixion. It's a direct following in his footsteps. So that's it for the first half of the last Beatitude here. I hope it's been a blessing to you. And if you've enjoyed these videos, I strongly encourage you to let Pastor Jerome or I know. This is our first time doing something like this, so we're still working out the formatting and the kinks. So if it's been something you've enjoyed and you'd like to see us come back to this format, let us know that. And if you have suggestions for how we can make it a little bit smoother, a little bit more understandable, we'd welcome those sorts of helpful, constructive comments as well. And so until our next session next week, I hope you have a blessed rest of your week. Bye-bye.